this podcast is made possible by the generosity of listeners like you. Kindly consider a contribution through Patreon or PayPal. Links are in the details box. Patreon is a monthly subscription that you can cancel anytime, and PayPal is a one-time donation. Any amount is appreciated. And follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, the handle, the Beirut Banyan. And you can find us on our YouTube channel with the same name, and you can start watching the episodes as they're released. Thank you for listening, and thank you for watching. I'm Ronnie Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan. It's a bit strange for me because it's almost like I know you by now.
Yeah.
I mean, we've spoken several times. I think at least 3 times, if not more.
Yeah. Twice on yours, once on mine.
Well, there you go. And this is our lucky number 4. I don't think number 4 is ever lucky, but let's just call it lucky number 4.
We can go with it.
What I like is that we've never seen each other. We've never met in person, and we've only spoken through audio. We never sort of video chat. We're not that close. but it's as if I know you so well by now that the moment you showed up, it's like, yeah, it's Joey.
Yeah.
So it's quite comfortable, actually.
I had the same thing with Lina Munzer. I had her twice on the podcast.
Right, yeah.
We never actually met. That's just what it... I mean, we probably were like, tear gas next to one another at some point. That's like, statistically speaking, that probably happened.
Yeah, no, it's true. And actually, I listened to both of your episodes with Lina Munzer, and yeah, you can feel it, that there's sort of like there's more than a friendship by now. And yet, and I think this is something very odd. It's that we can get very close to each other without actually knowing each other, at least the way we used to know each other. So there's something about this medium that is special.
And the moment.
And the moment, yeah. That might be the only silver lining to this otherwise depressing, very tragic chapter.
Yeah.
I'm going to say right now that I'm glad. See, by now you're somebody who literally, I think we can message each other if we want to vent, and we sort of make room to vent. And I'm really happy that you got in touch this time and wanted to sort of reflect on what we're going through, maybe on our separate conversations that we've had with others, and maybe just in terms of trying to make sense of the tragedy. So for that reason, I guess it's nice that we haven't structured anything. We're just going to let things come out. And Joey, I'm going to give you the floor because I've spoken too much the last week. I've been trying to release episodes every day. And I'm going to turn to you now to sort of maybe steer the conversation. And we can also talk about, the blast and the aftermath of the blast. But just in terms of the scene on the streets and the politics that might be changing for the better, could be politics as usual as well. Maybe it's too early. So let's start there and sort of, I'll give you the floor.
Yeah, well, on Saturday we had the large protests. They were the largest, since October, November.
Yeah.
In some ways, that I was more in my element on Saturday than I was on Tuesday. So, like when the explosion happened, obviously, I've quote unquote dealt with a number of disasters and catastrophes and atrocities and whatnot over the years, especially when it comes to Syria. But there was always the advantage of the fact that I'm not Syrian. And so I've never been to Syria. My first time that I wanted to visit was, 2011, which wasn't exactly the best year.
Yeah.
So that didn't happen. And so the friends that I made, though, it still allowed a sort of distance, a certain way, an emotional distance. I was emotionally invested in my friends, but I was able to relate their stories with some kind of detachment, which facilitated the telling of the story in some cases in the context of journalism. With this blast, like all of that was thrown out of the window. I wasn't able to do anything I recorded the episode with Lina Munzer on Friday, I think, so 3 days after. And honestly, I needed to talk to her as much as I needed to just have an episode, just kind of like have something that I know in 10 years would still be relevant, hopefully, like just the moment recorded, because the emotional side of it is something that is very difficult to describe. And in some ways, you sort of need it raw, and you need it with all of the, ums and oof and all of the noise, in a sense that you might edit out in an episode sometimes, but this really felt like it's just recording it as it is. It's what it is, and that's it. And that's what we did. Saturday, so this weekend, the big protests, I was more in my element because I've covered them before. And I've covered them from the ground, so as a protester slash media activist slash whatever I would be called. Or sometimes, even when I was in Lebanon, I couldn't attend the protest, I would basically do exactly what I did this Saturday. So it's the same medium. There's only 1 hour difference, so it didn't really feel that far away. Obviously, if you're physically in Lebanon, it's still different. But there was once I had to like help out a friend at in his place, like elsewhere in Lebanon, and protests were happening in Beirut, and I was still kind of doing this thing on Twitter, like just updating. So it was the same process. In some ways, it connected me a bit more. I felt actually a sense of pride that I usually don't feel, and it's not a nationalistic pride. I hate those. It's not my thing whatsoever. It's just a comfort of knowing that the thing that you experienced is reflected in other people, like that they have also experienced it. Not the horror necessarily, because I didn't experience it. I'm not in Lebanon, the explosion. But the reactions to it, that the anger was really what it was, that I wasn't, because I'm here I just have a couple of Lebanese friends who are here. The rest of the people I know are sort of like from everywhere around the world. I'm talking of the face-to-face people in Geneva. And so it's not the same. I mean, they're also invested. They've been there most of these ones. It's not the same. And I needed to see other people be as angry as I was. And even angrier, because like I couldn't throw anything, there's nothing to throw out here, I had fishkhil, as we say, and so that there was an element of Saturday that was a bit cathartic, but at the same time I sort of like I paused myself a little bit, or I told myself that like the catharsis, is that the word? Like it's not enough. Like it's not enough to just feel good and that we just let it out today.
Yeah.
That what happened on Tuesday, the 4th of August, is permanent. Like we said this before. We said there's no going back before. If we seriously don't mean it this time, it means nothing. What happened 1 week ago, literally 3 hours ago or something, because it's at 6:08 p.m. as we all know now. It's something that we can't even joke with it. We cannot play with this. We cannot even risk anything. I just heard that there are explosive in the Ma'amal of Zoo that they're looking into, and I was like, what the sorry, can we swear?
Please do, Joey.
Okay, it is like what the fuck, we're really, if you're seriously telling me that this is what we need to think about 1 week after this happened, like it's reaching a level of grotesqueness that whatever I say, it just feels that there can also be worse. Like they can actually push it further. That we know that they can. That they are actual warlords. They have done worse than what happened last Tuesday, because it was quote unquote an accident. They didn't do it directly. So
right. Yeah.
They have done worse directly. We know this. Everyone knows this. So I think the anger can go in different ways. Some of which might be more productive. Other might be less productive. I don't know. But I'm very wary of policing that anger. I think the anger is super legitimate, and I think that people who are angry need to be heard for what they're doing and what they're saying. And we shouldn't be. I'm always aware of people who are kind of like on Twitter, which I'm one of them. It's just kind of like analyzing this to death, essentially.
Yeah.
And it's almost like we're proposing solutions as if everyone is on the streets right now checking out Twitter timeline, which is obviously not what's happening.
Right.
But there is this sense, Twitter can kind of boost narcissistic tendencies in some ways.
Well said.
And so, this is where we are now. It's a very bad situation. There's no sugarcoating it. There's no, whatever uphill battle we're facing, it's a steep one. It's something that I would never say there's no hope or anything like this, because for me that's as useless as to say that everything is fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, things are not good. Like, things aren't good. There's no lying about this.
I mean, it's almost like a parallel universe. That kind of feeling you had, detached, because by just sheer geography, you're in Switzerland.
Uh-huh.
I mean, yeah, it's night and day, I guess, compared to what's happening right now in Beirut. I'm in New York. I mean, New York has its issues. There's just nothing that can compare to what Beirut is going through. And I felt the same thing. And I tried doing something similar. And you mentioned that you didn't edit. It's just sort of a raw capturing the moment. I think yours came out 100 times better than my attempt, because I tried a live episode where the audio was so poor. And I recorded with 6 guests in a span of 3 hours.
Wow.
And I think that's okay. I think it's permissible, because the last I think it's now 5 or 6 episodes that I've released have just been donations focused, and I try to sort of emphasize that there's really not much else that can be done right now if you're away from Lebanon, if you're unable to actually physically contribute. So whether it's cleaning the rubble, or whether it's just participating in these demonstrations, or whatever, if you're away, I don't see any other sort of productive avenue, short of, which is what you were saying, sharing your thoughts online and Twitter and the like. But you're right, there is that narcissistic tendency, and I just couldn't see any other avenue other than trying to raise money. And I think that's okay. You can kind of let a few episodes, quality, the editing, the those
That's
things,
fine.
they can slide. And there you go, another And there's something else that happened to me, which you just eloquently described it. It's that I mean, you want to let it out, and as much as you try letting it out, I think something like this cannot be removed from your system. I think it's permanent. I think this is permanent damage.
I agree.
And I mean, from my side, you've experienced this just by the sheer fact that you've lived in Lebanon. We've all had episodes where there's an explosion.
Yes.
All of us have experienced this.
Yes.
All of us have been close enough, or maybe sort of we heard it, or we ran away from something that was happening. So explosions are not special to Beirut. But this is special, because it's not. I mean, it's even the word explosion, I think, has in Beirut has a different meaning. And that in the immediate aftermath, a lot of people were sort of trying to link it to the tribunal's verdict. So we go there right away.
Yes.
It's like an automatic assumption. Yeah, and that's how it is.
That was my. I mean, it's a rational assumption.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Like the timing is fucked. Like, this is insane timing.
Exactly.
All things considered.
Yeah.
It just so happens that I'm sure lots of people are still in that conspiracy mindset anyway, regardless of what we say.
People were doctoring these photos with missiles and all that. Yeah.
But the reality is in some ways worse.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, actually,
it's stupider. It's more reckless. The implications are more disastrous in some ways, because we're not talking about some evil hands behind. Like, it's not like one person wanted to kill one person,
right?
Or like a system wanted to kill a critical voice or whatnot, which we are quote unquote more used to. And indeed, like, I remember 2005 very clearly. I remember the bombings of 2006 very clearly.
Exactly.
I was near the bomb that killed Gibran Twaini, because it's not far from where I live. It was on my birthday that Samir Osir was killed. There's all of these, my teens, essentially, like these were, and at some point even I remember, like, I was, when Hariri was assassinated, I was 14. So like, in school, it was more of we would joke about these things, because we had no real understanding of the severity of what was happening.
Exactly.
So the joke is that, tomorrow there's no school. That was I was 14. We didn't know any. I had no idea who any of these people were. Sorry. Like, it took me like 2005 was a crash course for me in Lebanese politics. And so it's all been downhill ever since.
Right. So that's great. That's actually that's quite telling. Yeah, like, your formative years have all been just sort of crashing with the story as well. Yeah, no, it's true. But there's something. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
No. Please go ahead.
No, it's we are going too much into down the rabbit hole. But like I had posted this list on Twitter in May or something, because there was some stupid British tabloid thing. There's a lot of those, and I usually ignore them. But there was one in which like he's this guy in his 50s, I think, or something like this, and he was saying something along those lines of like anyone who's like basically millennials, like they haven't experienced actual trauma or something as ridiculous as that. And so I just listed them. I just listed all of my traumas. I just listed,
Should be your CV. It's like 2005.
I was 9 when Israel was kicked out of the South. I was 14 when Syria was kicked out. I was 15 in 2006 during the war. Blah, 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 blah. And it's like, just today, a Palestinian friend it's on Twitter. I just retweeted it. She like co-tweeted it basically and said like, unfortunately, we have to add another one to the list.
Yeah.
I'm 29 when this happened. And it's like, I've always kind of tried to understand why everything is so numerical for me. Like, I think in numbers, I think in dates, and the fact that it's 6 or 8, hey, khalas, it's in my head forever. Like, that's never gonna go away.
Yeah.
And I have this feeling, and time will tell, and we're saying it, and so it's recorded. But I have a feeling that the symbol of 608 specifically is gonna kind of stick in some way, one way or another. Like these clocks that were broken specifically at 608, there's something like horrifically symbolic about the fact that time was stopped in a country where we're haunted by the past, we're haunted by the future, the present is stolen, and then suddenly time is stopped like this. It's like, I don't even know. I still haven't found a word to describe it. I've been writing this article for a few days now, and I haven't yet submitted it anything because it feels like an obituary. Like it feels like I am saying goodbye, and that's not what I mean. That I don't want this to be the impression, but there is a raw feeling there. But the advantage of articles is that you do rewrite and edit and stuff, so you want it to be in a certain format by the time it's published, because I have my own diary. So like the raw format, I write it in my own journal, in my own diary.
Yeah.
And what I want to put out to the world, in a sense, is something that someone may find useful today, but I do want someone in 5 years to also find it useful in one way or another. And so this requires a bit more editing. But anyway, yeah, like, it's
this like, I think a number of things happened, and you just described some of them, and I think symbolism is so important. I think it's the first minutes that people were sharing the mushroom cloud, that thing, that sort of image before the explosion, before the echo, right? Just silence. You just see that. Yeah, I think that. I'm trying to relate it to another context. Different stories, different histories, but it doesn't really matter. Americans watching the Twin Towers sort of blow up.
Sure, yeah.
That kind of, we're all watching it at the same time, maybe. Or if it's not at the same time, we're watching replays of it over and over and over. It changes things permanently. And I think this the way it happened. No. The reasons it happened, I think, are maybe part of the story. And those are things that are going to be talked about, I think, endlessly, that what led to this moment, and we'll go into this. But I think that's not the bigger story here. I think it's that something that looks like Hiroshima, right? But it's not. But it looks like Hiroshima.
It does.
But it just, I mean, that these things don't happen in 2020 unless they're controlled in the desert, and people know about it on sort of cable news maybe, and environmentalists frown upon it. But these don't happen in ports in major cities. This is like an attack, although it's negligence, and also that, I mean, the whole world saw it, and it's not just Beirut that was shocked. The whole world was shocked.
Sure.
And everyone we know has either had some injury or material damage, or maybe both. And it's not like this is it's not just the port that went. I mean, residential neighborhoods near the port are torn to shreds. I mean, it's Jemez and Madam Khair, these two neighborhoods that I only think about in terms of that's really what's escaped a lot of the pain of whether it's the Civil War or even these assassinations. Most of them did not happen in those kinds of places, so they were spared, and it becomes associated with maybe a younger, more. It's almost like you can wander around Madam Khair at night and you don't know if you're in Nice or in Marseille or in Istanbul or in Beirut. That kind of lifestyle, if you will, that was shattered. I think that adds to it too. And of course that, I mean, those wheat silos that for some reason, I mean, that explosion was, in a way, we're so lucky that it's the wheat silos that took. Yeah, they took maybe a third of the impact.
And the Mediterranean Sea took the
other third, and then the rest is what impacted Beirut. And I'm just thinking, imagine those wheat silos were not there. I mean, imagine that the warehouse was.
Would have had Hamra and Dahi and Corniche. And like a place like Dahi that is so dense, for example, like. I've gone through all of the even worse scenarios.
so that kind of symbolism. I mean, Lebanon is full of symbolism, right? We're always celebrating those symbolic moments when there's something positive happening. But this is real symbolism, I think. And I think I don't want to be, I don't want to imagine going back to the usual pathetic scene that we've grown up in. I don't want to see that. And I really, I mean, and I agree with what you said earlier. If it doesn't happen now, we're doomed with a failed state that it's beyond our control. Because
it would be deteriorating beyond.
Every single problem in modern Lebanese history helped produce this event. Joey, sorry. No. I just want to ask you one more thing before we could.
No.
Is it easy for you to even do a podcast now about what's happening? I mean, are you able to even, beyond Lena, beyond that episode, are you able to really, I mean, properly reflect without wanting to vomit?
No, it hasn't happened yet. For now, the podcast with Lena is the only one of August.
Okay.
I had a bunch of stuff. Like I had an episode, like a podcast episode on Slovenia. Like August was supposed to be the most diverse of the countries, and I had done serious research into every single country. I was even gonna have one on Belarus and everything, but for now, postponed to September.
Right.
I may have another one at some point in August in which I reflect on my own, or I have someone on. I really don't know, but for now, Lena's is a standalone episode for August. But
the reason I ask you though is because I was curious. I'm finding it so painful to go down that road, and I'm trying to do it as much as possible without it causing sort of personal harm. Because and I really think this is you need to have, like what you said earlier, you need to have people that are in pain with you. I think it has to be shared. Otherwise, it's very toxic. It's
part of the process. It really is part of the process. And the fact that we're outside of Lebanon, I think it's one of the only mediums we have at the moment.
Right. Yeah.
And like so I said that Saturday during the protest, I was more kind of like in my zone in a sense. I was able to compartmentalize, and even when the bombing actually happened, I have a Twitter thread that's like 6 days long.
I've seen that. Yes, it starts with the photos and then it goes down. Yes. I get updates every day. I'm like, that's an old thread. It's still happening.
I do this to kind of it's become part of how I process things in some ways. Not always, not with everything. But specifically when it comes to Lebanon, because when it comes to Lebanon, Syria to a certain extent, I would do it from time to time. But especially when it comes to Lebanon, there is also the element that I need friends of mine. That's how I picture them. So friends of mine, because they have come to me before on this. But if you scale it up, so basically anyone who's well-meaning, who need to inform themselves, or who need to debunk someone, or who needs to counter someone, because there's a lot of very, very ill-meaning folks on Twitter. And this is something that they can use because it's irrefutable. It's photos and videos. I'm just translating for the most part. There's very little of my own opinion in all of this.
Yeah.
It's what it is. You can completely disagree with me. It doesn't matter. I'm literally quote tweeting the videos. I'm translating the signs from Arabic and the chants from Arabic into English, and that's basically the majority of it.
Yeah.
And it serves a certain function because, excuse me, I started something like 12, 13 minutes after 6:08. Like it's like 6:30 Lebanese time or something like that. 5:30 in Switzerland or something along those lines. And I remember exactly why it was because it's such a ridiculous, it becomes one of those things. You know, we've all heard the 9/11 stories of like, I was in the kitchen and I heard a blast. Or I was, you know, we've all heard these things. And for me, 2005, when Harry was killed, I remember specifically I was in school and I was in Sankur al-Najm. That was my school. It overlooks a hill, like the Beit Mary Mansouriye hill. It overlooks Beirut. Right. So like we were on the library where we were in, the kids and stuff, overlooks Beirut. We hear the rumbling, of course, it moves a bit, and we see the actual. And this is my first memory. Now in my of these things. Yeah. And in my mind, it's sort of blurred into 2006. So like I can't fully like if I see videos, I remember obviously. Yeah. But if I sit down and I just want to think of 2006, 2005, there's the same distance because I was doing it from Beit Miri in that area. Yeah. And so there was still a disconnect. With this, it's sort of a different disconnect because I was just in Beirut. Like in my mind, I came here, pandemic hits. And so everyone's indoors, whatever. Yeah. Just before that, for 3 months, almost every single day on the streets. And I left and I do therapy on a weekly basis. And one of the things that we always talk about is how I always have difficulties either saying goodbye, like as basically having a separation between this is finished and this is starting, and a difficulty even sometimes emotionally investing in something, because in the back of my mind, I always wonder whether this is going to go at some point. And so this is a Syria thing. This is friends from Aleppo and Hama and Homs, and this is something that I didn't even know that I had picked up from them. I thought, as I said before, that I have this kind of detachment, but it turns out that I don't. It just turns out that the detachment is sort of maybe functional on the spot. If I need to do the work, I will do the work for the most part, not always. Right. But then the psyche is still sort of harmed. The emotional damage is still there somehow. It's just a matter of how manageable it is. Sometimes it's manageable, sometimes it's not manageable. And with this, it was that. It was, now I specifically remember the couch I was on. Like, this is what it is. I was on the couch, specifically on the new couch, because we're moving to a new place, which is still like boxes and stuff and whatever. And just the surreal element of it is that I was watching on my laptop, like as I'm talking to you now, this exact same laptop. Yeah. The videos, the first video I saw was the one where, you had some folks on a boat and they saw the coming from the shore.
It's like a view of Zaytuni Bay, the hotels. Yeah.
And it sort of shows it, but it doesn't show it in the same way. It shows like there was a bomb. Like for me, it's just, this looks like a bomb. Yeah. But then the videos from like Mam Khayel or somewhere probably in Ashrafiyya, like just from a bit of a distance, usually from a high-rise 5th floor, 6th floor, whatever, where you really see it coming. Right. This is where it kind of like, it completely fucked my mind. I was like, this is serious. Like, this is not the same. We're talking about, this is not Israel. I remember the Israeli bombs. It's not like this. I remember the car bombs. It's not like this. This is something different. Yeah. And the mushroom cloud, I was like, well, we don't have nuclear weapons. I would have known by now if we have nuclear weapons. So it's like, what the fuck is this? This is how it was for me. It's like, what is this? And then it started popped up. Okay, we still don't know, by the way. We don't know exactly what was in the hangar. We know that there was ammonium nitrate, 2,700 tons of ammonium nitrate, which is insanity in itself. But apparently there was fireworks in it, maybe weapons, maybe both, maybe because we saw the fireworks stuff.
Yes, Reuters did a piece on that they were. I mean, it's a Lebanese sources telling Reuters that
there were fireworks inside.
Yes, there were fireworks inside. There was a door that was open, and there was a hole, I think, in the roof. And the Lebanese security in the port, this is my understanding of the article, that they were trying to repair the door and the roof, and that there was a fireworks storage next to the ammonium nitrate. While there was welding happening, these were construction workers. The welding
Yes.
sort of set off sparks that hit the fireworks.
That's what I remember.
Yeah, and then so
There
it's
was
all,
something along
yeah,
those lines even the first day. It might have been welding. It was
yes,
kind of like the logical conclusion.
yeah,
But then I remember I posted a video that I received on WhatsApp of like someone who was just next to the hangar, and I have no idea if this person is alive. It's
yeah.
insane. Like he was literally like 20 meters, like literally like 20 meters away. I have no idea how someone can survive this. I don't know how the video survived, but it did.
It is incredible, right, that these videos are available. I mean, it's
Yes,
tragic
yes,
at the same time that you don't know if they're alive, but the fact is there were people so close to this
yes, yes,
thing
yes.
that happened. Yeah,
And I just remember the feelings that I was compartmentalizing at first. So it did not hit me immediately.
yeah,
But I knew it was slowly hitting me. And no, I asked my two friends, who one is Iraqi, one is Lebanese, they're together, and they were living nearby, and I told them to come over because I needed people around. My partner was in another town, and I told her, get an Uber, come here, please. I need humans around me. This is
yeah,
not, this is
sure.
seems quite extreme what's
Yeah,
happening. And I went through the compartmentalizing process. It lasted like 3 or 4 days in which I was still sort of functional. I was updating. I felt like just do as much as possible and then collapse. Like just do it now and then collapse instead of
yeah,
collapsing at first. It's just how I process it. But then two news stories, if you want, or calling them news stories, started popping up. One is the Beirut Fire Brigade, the fact that they all died.
yeah,
This for me completely broke me. Like
yeah.
the photo of them in the car or the ambulance, the fire truck, and smiling, and the fact that I'm sorry, I forgot her name now. She was supposed to get
Sahar, I forgot her last name.
Sahar. Yeah, she was supposed to get married in like 3 months, and then
Yeah,
there is the photo of the video of the funeral, and he's wearing tuxedo. Like this is the sadness was from the beginning mixed with anger.
yeah,
But then the anger took over. Like I was still feeling hurt, but really anger took over. Like I started saying things online that even before, and I was already a bit reckless before, but even before I would kind of pace myself sometimes. Like at worst, I got blocked by Gibran Basil, but no one really came after me for these things.
Are you blocked by
But
him now? Are you? Hey.
yeah,
Oh,
I've been
really?
blocked since 2017 or
Oh,
something.
so you're one of the old blocks. I see. Yeah,
Yeah, when he
you've been
used to do
doing
it
the
a lot.
job. Yeah, you've been. That's funny actually.
And the second thing, just to finish on this
Of
note,
course.
was the fact that my mom has a stained glass workshop. She did the stained glasses of Surso,
Yes.
of
Right.
a number of churches. There's the Protestant church in downtown. There's the Capucin church somewhere in downtown. I remember I've been there with her, but I don't remember exactly what they were. But she kept on getting over the next 2 days, so like what, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, yeah, more or less, every single day, more and more videos and photos of all of that destroyed. And on some level, some of it can be rebuilt. You know, a church that's connected to a international church network might get the funds, and okay, then it's a material damage.
Yeah.
But some of the stuff that were destroyed were like, one of them was a 19th century church, stained glass, that my mom didn't do. She just renovated it. And that's completely gone now. And you cannot replace these things. Khalas, that's it. Gone for good. And it's just the emotional impact of it is that she's 60 now. Like all of this, some of them she started making them in the 90s. And just like this, in 5 seconds, I'm supposed to accept that all of it is gone. We had different calculations in mind. Our plans that I am here in Switzerland. I'll try and make some salary, put some aside, become one of those, sending back money, all of that, which I had never planned for before. But like, this was a plan. And it's a plan that I could digest because I could rationalize it. It's like, okay, not the most ideal plan, but could be worse. But then this happened, and I was like, what's worse? Israel bombing Gaza? Assad bombing Halab? Is that what we're talking about now? Because there was always this there was always this sense that we were sort of isolated by a combination of sheer dumb luck, because we're not, whatever, various factors, but also because we sort of went through it. 70s and 80s, that was our moment, quote unquote, of hyper-violence, and now society was sort of more tired about it, and so we won't see it. Yeah. Supposedly. That's anyway what we would tell each other. Mm-hmm. The fact that it happened like this, and that it wasn't even an attack, like I feel horrible saying it, but a part of me was wishing it was an attack. Like, just a part of me. I was in denial about it. I wasn't comfortable with it. But I told myself, well, if it's an attack, then it fits in some pattern. Israel bombs Hezbollah in Syria or in the Golan Heights, in the occupied Golan Heights, or this happens or this happens. So there's a tit for tat. Maybe this is the tat. Maybe there'll be a tit, and then it stops. You can rationalize it. It fits into a certain timeline, even though you don't like the timeline. This doesn't fit in anything.
Yeah.
This is stupider than all of it. This is just extreme incompetence, criminal negligence. They didn't do shit until like 4 or 5 days. They started to do the investigation. The army gave up on search and rescue like 6 days later. Yeah. And Michel Aoun comes in his stupid jogging or whatever, and he says, "Ana ma khasni," like fuck off, like khalas. Seriously, we got to the point where you need to fucking leave. Khalas, this is not acceptable. And I got pissed because I have friends who are family members who are Aouniyya. I called them up and I yelled at them. I told them, I am not talking to you anymore as long as you support this party. I literally told them that. And khalas, like I've made a commitment to this, كلهم, including family members, friends who are Aouniyya or Hezbollah, or these are old connections that I no longer have. But family members, I sort of still have to deal with them. And if they don't understand that this is serious, nothing will make them understand. So I'm putting an extra personal cost on them, that they are personally losing me, if they don't understand how severe this is. Then this is one explosion. There's no law of nature that says that a building cannot collapse. There's nothing that says that another hangar can't have other shit and we still don't know what's in it. As long as the fundamental problem behind this hangar, what happened at the port of Beirut in hangar number 12 or something, if that is not resolved, and it clearly seems like it's not going to get resolved, as we know, we're sitting ducks. We're just hoping that nothing else happens. Hoping, like the airport was just 5 seconds away from being blown over as well. We got super lucky that only some buildings collapsed because of the silos again. Like now the silos aren't there. Like we're just playing. It's like we're tossing a coin. We're tossing a coin and hoping nothing worse happens.
Okay, so there's a few things I want to explore here. And I'm going to leave the family communication to the last one, because I am very interested in that. I think that opens doors that are not often open, and I want to open that with you. But let's go back a bit to the earlier. You said that you were hoping that it was an attack, and I think I know what you mean by that, and that it's just easier to digest it.
Sure.
It's almost like.
Because it happened before.
And something else, I think, you tell me if I'm wrong, that it's beyond our control. That this is sort of, Lebanon is part of a bigger problem, and this is not a Lebanese-born problem. So that's kind of sort of.
Yes, that's part of it.
Right,
sure.
And I think a lot of people that were rushing to that conclusion early on, the first day, I think that was that motive, which is it has to be Israel. Of course, Hezbollah puts its weapon. I mean, it's like it fits that story.
It fits the story.
Sure. And it also fits, actually, I mean, forget conspiracies. It actually does fit the explosions that we've seen in Iran the last 2 months, sort of like repeated attacks. So that, and then it's an explosion of that magnitude. Of course, we don't have that much ammonium nitrate in one place. Can't be. It must have been a weapons dump or something to that effect. Investigations aside, whatever the final story is aside, I think that's that sort of, it's comfort. Yeah. Looking for comfort in tragedy. I share that sentiment, and I think everything that is wrong with Lebanon, everything that people are fighting against, everything that we've complained about, everything that led to October 17, because October 17 is not a joyous occasion. It's born out of extreme pain. So everything that led to that moment, that outburst, and then all of the demands that came after, I think are part of this story.
Yes.
And I think it goes. You said it. It's criminal negligence. It's violence. Citizens dying by
Yes.
by sheer fact that they live in Beirut.
Yes. Yes.
And I think it speaks to something that, and we can go as far as you want on this topic because I think it speaks to the way the regime is put together, and why a port is not just a port. It is not just a harbor. It is not just shipping. It's not just it's not just trade. It's not just that. In Lebanon, it's more than that. It's a sensitive site, and I think all the things that keep this country from entering a post-Civil War process contributed to what is the most reckless, man-made disaster. And hopefully it's something that will never happen again in Lebanese history, but we saw it happen. And I think maybe I'll ask a question before getting deeper into this. For me, it's hard to just blame corruption and incompetence on the ammunition on the ammonium nitrate storage. I have to believe, and I do believe that a lot of actors that participate in the port's activities are to blame.
Yeah,
this includes the security, these Lebanese army security. This includes other forms of security, maybe political parties that have their people there. And this also includes Hezbollah, which is very, very eager to make sure that there's oversight and indirect control of the airport and the port. Yes. So they're part of it too. And that's why I think this kind of huge devastation can be something like a Chernobyl moment. And I talked about this in a recent episode. And I think this is why maybe our conversation is born out of that episode, perhaps. The Chernobyl moment, Chernobyl is not a Cold War attack.
No.
It's not a CIA sort of operation. And it's not the Kremlin trying to sabotage a Ukrainian nuclear plant. So no, the Chernobyl is born out of mismanagement.
Yes.
And also whatever paralyzed and destroyed the Soviet Union at the end. That moment is very important. And then it took years for the Soviet Union to finally collapse.
5 years or something.
5 years, yeah. So maybe let's go there before we get into the more local, because I want to touch on the personal as well. But let's go there. Is this to you a Chernobyl moment where all the things that went wrong in Lebanon are now on the table, or are we still too afraid? Are we still too afraid to talk about security and how something like this cannot be fully controlled by the state? The most incompetent, the most mediocre, the most irresponsible politicians. But you can't really hold them to account as long as there's a security agency that is deliberately encouraging this turning a blind eye behavior to their own issue, right? Yes. And this maybe also it's part of that. Say as much as you want about that subject. I know it is part of it. It is part of it. And let's get out the Hezbollah elephant in the room immediately. Nasrallah's speech, I watched part of it and then I tortured myself and watched the entirety of it. I don't know why I still do this, but I did. And I don't he's gotten more and more predictable over the years, I have to say. And the fact that he told us, well, two things at the same time. When he said that Hezbollah knows more about the port of Haifa than the port of Beirut. Yeah.
First of all, that's a shit thing to say. You shouldn't say something like this in any context. It's not a smart thing to say. Second of all, how is that a good thing? Even if we believe this, which I absolutely do not. How is this a good thing?
Right.
You are supposedly part of the Lebanese landscape, and you're telling us that you know more about the port of Haifa than the port of Beirut, which is 5 seconds away from Dahiya. Is that seriously what you're telling us? And no one believed it. I've seen a lot of the reactions, even some people who are kind of maybe more sympathetic or something. I mean, you still have the cult members and all of this. That's difficult to change their minds, but there are lots of people who are sort of in between. There are lots of people who are not like card-carrying party members,
right?
But they sort of have some kind of familial affiliation, or like it's their neighborhood, or, that's how it works in Lebanon. And in fact, I genuinely think that's the majority of all political parties in Lebanon. Yeah. But putting that aside, I will definitely forget the names, but we know that the security agencies knew about it. We know that the army definitely knew about it.
Yeah.
We know that both Michel Aoun himself and Hassan Diab himself knew about it.
In July 20, I think there was they physically read reports about it. So that's just 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
We're at beyond and like you can use the Trump argument of like he's not smart enough to know about these things, and like maybe that's accurate, but legally it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
They are at this position. No one forced Michel Aoun to fucking be president. He's been wanting to be president since the fucking 80s. He got it in 2016, and now half of the city blew up. Like, this is a man who in 1990 did his war of liberation, whatever. A significant part of the city blew up.
Yes.
He fled. In the middle of it.
Yeah.
He fled in the middle of it, sought asylum in France for 15 years, comes back. 5 seconds later, he's already buddies with Hezbollah. And 15 years later, the city blows up. Like, what kind of fucking resume is this? Like, at what point are we dealing with a phenomenon of like, how can you love your chair this much? It doesn't even look good. Nothing looks good. The palace looks like shit. Nothing is glory. There's nothing to it.
I'm sorry interrupting you, but in the private conversation, no, we'll get back to this. But in a private conversation, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, somebody was shouting, venting, just letting it out on the phone. Friend of mine, and she was trying to explain to her roommate, who's not Lebanese, how could Lebanon elect such a leader? And she was trying. She couldn't explain, and I told her, I think it's not that. I think he chose us to be our president. It's not he declared Lebanon as his sort of country. It's the other way around. But
he did self-declare in the 80s anyway. So
that's true. He self-declared it. But you're right, Joey. You're absolutely right. Ashrafi burning under his tenure both terms, and he's still in Ba'abda. But that's
insane.
But so I'm going to add one thing and then let you keep going.
Sure. Yeah.
That's my fear, is that he's still in Ba'abda. But so we'll get back to that. But please, I interrupted you.
No. The other thing was, Mona Harb, who's an academic I really respect, she posted on Twitter, why do you care so much? She was talking kind of like in the air to the government, if you want. Like, why do you care so much about an empty building, the parliament? Like,
yes, I saw this, yeah.
What is so important about such an empty symbol or something like this?
Right.
And I replied, like, the symbol is what matters. For Nabih Berri, it is his private property. He has been Speaker of Parliament since 1992. He quite literally sees himself as a mafioso. He probably has watched all of these movies and genuinely believes that he's like this. I wish I was joking. Wahid Allah, I wish I was joking. But the guy genuinely believes. He's 82. He's been like this since the 70s? Like, you're not going to change him. It's been... He was like this in his 30s and he's in his 80s now. He's not going to change. It's not going to happen. And he has a section of the army that's loyal to him. And of course, he has Haris and Majlis, like parliamentary guards, that are obviously, literally basically his private guard. Yeah. That's basically what they are at this point. They probably by now, like we're talking about 30 years of this, so they have cultivated a sort of dependency that even if maybe in the back of their mind they have their conscience kind of tickling them, maybe like it's not enough to make much of a difference. The fact that they were tear gassing people a few days after. There was even actually one day after the action, there was also a protest and whatever. But like, they were tear gassing people, surrounded, even in Jemaise, like surrounded by the destroyed Jemaise, completely obliterated Jemaise, and they still had the weapons and the resources after not doing shit to find the survivors, not even cleaning the streets. Who cleaned the streets? We cleaned the streets. Like Lebanese folks and Syrian folks and Ethiopians and Sri Lanka, just random people who live in Beirut, they were cleaning the streets. They didn't do anything. They did a photo op this morning or yesterday. They got some brooms and they did it for 5 seconds and they fucked off. Like, honestly, there's no... Like, we really got to a point where anyone who is telling me that they still buy this, like they still buy this shit, honestly, like, we need to have a serious chat, you and I, you, me, this metaphorical person in front of me. This is not a difference of opinion. We're not discussing whether we should privatize the banks or socialize the banks. We're not debating universal healthcare. We're not debating anything. We're just debating whether we want Lebanon to explode or not. That's what we're debating here.
Right, but okay. Okay. There's a lot I want to get into, but
I know. I'm sorry.
No. On the contrary. But I'm going to bring it up again, not to beat a dead horse, just to kind of try to understand what's really at stake in terms of the foreseeable future, because change is happening, whether the Lebanese regime, whatever this thing is now, wants it to or not. Things are changing, and I don't want things to change for the worse. And the reason I bring up, okay, let me try something which I haven't tried before. Could you imagine the port being more secure, or let's say the individuals in the port that are mediocre, and there's great interviews with certain security that were just playing ping pong, sort of.
Yes.
I think it was Synapse report that it's just that's their job. They play ping pong and they're instructed to kind of turn a blind eye to certain things. Okay, that situation. Could you imagine it improving if the security of the port was something that we could point the finger to and say, you're responsible? Not that we're unable to really point the finger right now. And what you said earlier about everyone getting reports about these about the storage, which go back 7 years. It's a deliberate decision to just leave it, ignore it, right? Okay, if there's one body that's accountable, you should be able to say, no, this is a big mistake. We're not being pressured by anyone to keep it there. We're going to get rid of it. We're going to relieve Lebanon of this stress, prevent an explosion from happening. That doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. And I'm always actively wondering, is it due to just simply corruption that this happened, or is it really the way Lebanon operates, which is you have a group that is able to literally wage war against Beirut if one person is fired, one person. Yes. And that's what happened in May 2008. One person. So imagine now the port. You can't get rid of the people that are actively sabotaging the security of the port, right? And then this group, if they remain unscathed from this incident, it just means that the same situation is going to happen. It means that they're unable to evolve. They're unable to turn into something that is more accountable. And no one would ever say, get rid of Hezbollah. You can't. Hezbollah is a party in Lebanon, and despite all efforts, there will always be a Hezbollah in Lebanon. Sure. But that's not even the point. They should be a party. They should be. They should be probably one of the most important parties on domestic politics. Their weapons and their intelligence and their security should be over. It should be gone. And I fear that issue is deliberately left out of the room. It's sort of now is not the time to bring up that issue. At the same time, to me, that is the central issue. That how can we even begin to rebuild the port and then hope for something like this never happening again if the same situation is there? And I want people to rot in jail. I want accountability. I want everyone that had knowledge and willfully did nothing to be held to account. Everyone. There's not one person that led to this. There's so many people that are complicit, but they're not going to be part of that accountability. You're not going to see anyone on their side being sort of held to account, and this is what I fear. And I don't know if that's something that I can't imagine improvement in Lebanon, and I can't imagine anything going for the better with this situation. They're central to the problem. They may not have wanted that ammonium nitrate there. They may not have even had interest in that ammonium nitrate. But the fact is they're inspecting almost everything that goes in that port, and they make sure that their stuff enters without any hindrance. That is part of the story. and they do the same thing at the airport. They do the same thing in many sensitive sites.
Yeah.
We're going to have that deliberate turning a blind eye policy again.
Yes.
And you're going to have, you're going to have kickbacks, you're going to have corruption, you're going to have negligence, and you're going to have a lot of crooked people taking advantage of the rest. And you'll have all these sort of unsavory types making money off of that arrangement, and that's probably what led to this.
Yeah. But that's why they're rejecting an international investigation. That's why, at the end of the day, I mean, ideally, the weapons should have disbanded in 2000, as it was supposed to.
Yes.
The exception was that 90s, okay, the exception to Hezbollah because they are resisting in the south. It wasn't technically just them. There was some communists. There was the SSNP, like 5 of them at some point. You know, there was some exceptions being made to the specific thing. Okay. Honestly, putting that aside, like let's agree with that story. I think it has some issues even there, but let's agree with that story. Come 2000, and then between 2000 and 2005, there is zero justification. Shabbat is not a justification. It's just not a good argument.
No.
And then in 2006, you have the war. Okay, you have a war. The war happens. There was 2 conflicts, 2 sides. Shit happens. It's extremely bad. Israel committed more war crimes than most people can even count, and we know all of this. Then 2008 comes. 2008 is the first time that they really show their teeth. They really show their strength against other Lebanese for the first time since the Civil War.
Yeah.
Really to a significant extent. They overtook Beirut and parts of Mount Lebanon like this, very quickly.
Yeah.
That's even that, you can, if you are so minded, if you believe in that narrative, you can justify it. Oh, the telecommunications are needed, the networks are needed to resist Israel, etc., etc., etc. Forza Nura is pro-Saudi, pro-American, therefore we need, you can tell yourself a story. 2011 comes. For me, 2011 is either you support protests for justice and dignity and democracy, or you do not.
Yeah.
Many people tend to forget this, but Nasrallah first supported them. He first supported the Libyan one, the Egyptian one, the Tunisian one, the Yemeni one. He supported all of those. But then it came to Syria, and that's when the exception obviously came.
Yeah.
And for me, I have a different attitude toward Hezbollah, even much less tolerant attitude than even some of my anti-Hezbollah friends, basically. Because my angle towards Hezbollah, in some ways, is one that came through Syria rather than one through Lebanon.
Right.
And that gives me a different angle in some ways, because I literally know people whose homes were emptied by Hezbollah because Hezbollah used them as bases, to use them as snipers to shoot at people who wanted to leave Madaya, for example. I have friends from Madaya who told me these things. And for me, it's no longer me disagreeing with you, or me disagreeing with your philosophy, or me feeling, okay, you have your warlord, they have your warlords, I need to kind of find a way to reconcile this difference. Because if that was only the case, then it's a Lebanese problem. It's between me and you. You, the Hezbollah member, me, the anti-Hezbollah member, you, the Auna, you, the Uwait, you, the whatever. And there are certain rules of the game, which they don't respect, let's be honest. Okay. But there are certain rules of the game that I can then sort of play with. At some point, I would have given up on it anyway, because as we said, they don't respect them anyway. But the added dimension of Syria to me is something that I literally see collaboration with the Assad regime as synonymous with collaboration with the Israeli regime. Like for me, the SLA has been disgraced, as it should be, the South Lebanon Army, for those who don't know, which was Israel's proxy in the south, has been disgraced. The fact that Hezbollah has not yet been disgraced on those exact same terms tells me something about my own, because my house was bombed by the Assad regime before I was born. Like my mom was pregnant with me when that happened. And for me, it tells me something about my belonging to Lebanon, that many people around me, fellow Lebanese who are supportive of these parties, specifically Hezbollah, some Aouni sometimes take it even further than Hezbollah, but like specifically these two, and Amal obviously, that they are telling me something that I feel they don't fully understand what the implications of what they're telling me, because they're literally telling me that we should mourn, as we should, the bombings in the south, which we should, of course, but we shouldn't give a shit about the bombings in Mount Lebanon. And for me, this says things that are inherently sectarian. Whether it doesn't matter what my personal faith is, it doesn't matter what where my family comes from and whatnot. They're fairly mixed, but more of them are Christians. Most of them are Christians. That doesn't matter as much as it matters that you are telling me that the only way you will accept me as a fellow X is if I already accept your narrative. And this is a problem. For any kind of society, this is a very, very fundamental problem. And this is the frustration, because if the guy who punched me, I use this as an example, and I'll stop on this. The guy who punched me in Riyadh al-Salah during the fights, the second time around, the way he was looking at me, I was like, you're looking at me, the way he was looking at me is like he was almost expecting me to start speaking Hebrew to him. Like there was something in his eyes that was like, dude, do you know I live 20 minutes away? Like how disconnected are you? And the problem is this: sectarian parties in Lebanon have their own media system. It's an entire ecosystem. At the end of the day, in the same way that you can create a fascist in Germany or a fascist in Charlottesville or a fascist in whatever, you can create fascists in Lebanon. We don't use these terms because we barely talk about these things, but it is fundamentally what it is. We're talking about a totalitarian ideology that doesn't accept anyone else, and that is very dangerous. It's extremely dangerous.
Reverence to weapons, a worshipping of weapons, is a behavior of war. Yes. It is not a behavior of peace. Yeah. There's no reverence for figures that represent a militia unless there's war. And Lebanon is not special. Many countries have had this. Lebanon had it during the Civil War. Lebanon was doing it regularly. You know, people that we now we spit at, names that we curse regularly at ease, all of them are born from militia. And not too long ago, they had geographic control over parts of the country, and they were killing people. And there's very good reason to condemn them and say that they have no place in the republic any longer. And that comes out very easily, and it took us time to get there, but we got there. Yes. We got there. And people that didn't have weapons, that contributed to the fall of the country, deliberately yes. or not, doesn't even matter at this point. If they were willing to negotiate their own dignity and contribute to the pain and suffering of the republic and its citizens, we can slur them as well at ease, and we do that openly too. And you hinted at this already.
Yes.
The sheer reluctance of those people, not Hezbollah supporters, forget Hezbollah supporters, of people outside of Hezbollah's orbit, to exclude them from scrutiny and deliberately shield them, and expect that to be a Lebanese exception, where one group still has the right to bear arms in 2020, when there's no legitimate excuse any longer for arms. To me, it means that I really think the Civil War lives on. And if you're unable to detach your personal justified hatred for Israel, mm-hmm. and you're unable to sort of go beyond your personal mm-hmm. legitimate frustrations with what the Israelis are doing, not just mm-hmm. to Palestinians, but let's say to Lebanese over time. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If you're unable to separate that from Hezbollah's weapons, I consider that civil war.
Yes.
And you know what? Other countries call it different things. I mean, in Northern Ireland, they had the Troubles, and the IRA sure. was worshipped.
Sure.
But very, very, very few Northern Irish Catholics today still worship the IRA the way they did mm-hmm. 30 years ago. Maybe a handful wish they were still around. I don't see why that cannot happen with us, because it happened. It happened with every other militia. And every other militia turned political party have devolved to the point that they have no place any longer. They're being pushed aside. If they still survive this round, their fate is near. It is hard. It is hard to see them playing an active role much longer. But they are devolving. It took time, but they're exiting the stage. This group is not. Mm-hmm. And this group has tolerated and perhaps even encouraged the worst components of every other militia to do their bidding, and the non-militia types to also do their bidding. And that's why I see the port explosion as something that it should be exposing all of the country's problems at once. It's almost, to me, it should seem more like the regime, the post-war regime, the post-war order, committed suicide and blew up. Then again, I look at it now a week later, and it seems more and more that this round, Hezbollah will come out clean. And to me, that's the fate. That's really where you can bash everyone else as much as you want, and good, do it. Let it out. If you can't criticize their weapons, if you can't criticize the port's infrastructure and why it would tolerate something like that to begin with, without including them in the equation, it means at best, to me, it means failed state. And failed states still, I mean, they live technically. Somalia is still there, and you have regions that are autonomous, and it's Mogadishu is poor and crime-ridden, and Beirut could end up like that. I mean, it's foreseeable. And that to me, it's like the hesitation to state the obvious, and I mean, maybe it lives more online than it does right now in the streets. I don't know. I haven't been in Beirut since January. I've seen open debate on that group more now than ever before. And so that is there. It is there.
I remember that the last time we spoke on your podcast, I also mentioned something like the crack in the narrative, in a sense.
Yeah.
And last time we spoke on your podcast, on this podcast, I mentioned also that there's been like some cracks in the narrative, in their narrative. And that wasn't just like the optimist in me hoping that it was there. It was actually there. There was some more open defiance. There were more open defiance within the community, which is what matters at the end of the day. Sure. It doesn't matter as much what I think about Hezbollah. They can just, cast me aside as a wet guy. Like they just see it, which I'm not, by the way, for those who are confused. But because of sectarian calculations and where I'm from and all of that, and because I'm so anti-Hezbollah, therefore the only logical conclusion is that I am coordinated forces.
I never even thought about that. That is, you're right. In the traditional logical equation,
yes.
1 + 1 equals
You go with the statistical, I can kind of see the calculations they made in their head. Oh, he's from there, this sect, therefore X. That's it. And that's how it works.
Right.
But so. The fact that we saw on the same kind of podium of people who were being hanged, Nasrallah was among them.
Yes, yeah.
For me, that blew my mind in some ways, much more. That I felt like at this point that he couldn't not have been there. So because it's a visible thing, so like when it's chance, you can sort of, if you're not comfortable saying his name, you just focus on saying the other names. But if you're putting all of their bodies up, like as cardboard cutouts, it's obvious who you will be missing out. It's very obvious, next to one another.
Yeah.
So for me, I feel like the reverence of him is very difficult to decouple, to get rid of, because in some ways it's both religious and political. And when you have the mix of the two, that's super, super difficult too. It's like if the Batrak, who is super political as well, if he literally was the leader of the party of the Lebanese forces, for example, and he was giving the speeches and he was giving he was actually making the foreign policy. He's very powerful, don't get me wrong, and he does have quite a lot of clout, but he is primarily a religious leader. When it comes to Nasrallah, there's something specific. There's even the fact that we need to call him Sayyid. That's part of the thing. I can no longer, after Madaya and Halab and Hama and all of I can no longer do anything. I have nothing but disgust and disrespect towards him, as I have towards all of the others, plus the additional Syrian component, as I mentioned. But it's a matter of they are worried about early elections, possibly for a good reason, in the sense of from their perspective. They might actually lose some seats in the thick of the moment. Maybe the way they're thinking, if they're thinking at all, is that if we push them to next year or in 2 years, maybe things can go back to the shit normal in some ways, and so we can build back our support base. That may be how they're thinking. But right now, it's from all over the place. They're being criticized. Forget the Americans and the Israelis. That's the usual stuff. It doesn't have as much clout in some ways.
Sure.
In many ways, like if the Americans just shut up and say nothing, that would have been much better, honestly, because whatever they say is just, it gives additional arguments. So for me, like the other equivalent would be like on Saturday when there was all of the protests happening in downtown, Samir Jajar goes to Sahid Sissin, and he does his stupid photo op and he fucks off. But that photo op in its own is enough to be used by Hezbollah supporters and Amal supporters and Free Patriotic Movement supporters to say, you're saying Killun yani Killun? How can you say Killun yani Killun if Samir Jaja was there? Even though there were no protesters in Sahid Sissin.
Actually, there was a woman from the balcony who was cursing and shouting. Yeah.
And she was shut down. Like they yelled back, and not Jaja himself, but like probably his security guards and whatnot told her like skitaba in a very disrespectful way.
Fouti la joie or something like that.
Like go inside. Like very as usual.
Yeah.
So like the fact that the opponents of the revolution, like I don't know how to call them, but like people who are pro-government essentially, are willing to use every single trick of the book, any dishonest, dirty media tricks. They have their own TV channels at the end of the day to push this specific narrative, means that really even something as catastrophic as Lina Munzer said on the show, like she genuinely feels that they will not be held accountable.
Yeah.
And she's right. They will not be held accountable. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Nothing. If there was an ideal scenario, right now you would have a kind of like a truth committee conciliation, whatever they're called, a fact-finding investigation, and every single one of them would have to respond when called upon to respond, including Mishran, including Nabi Berri, including Hassan Nasrallah himself personally. But it's not going to happen.
And actually, everyone who knew about it and did nothing, they should all be held to account. Yes, absolutely. But you see that the minimum criteria is not there.
No.
Yeah. So this is you know what? That's where it comes down to. It's that I would just like this country to be able to govern itself, and then we can blame actors and throw them in jail when necessary and bring in something better to replace it. We don't have that. I think the foundation is still not there. And I'm going to echo something you said earlier. I think maybe it's Lebanon's curse at the end of the day, is that there's just things that happen in Lebanon that cannot be held to account. Hezbollah goes to Syria. Your Syrian friends are the ones sort of telling you how bad things are in Syria, but we cannot do anything about that. You know, it's from Lebanon. It's in Syria. We just you can't even. It's beyond your control. You cannot help heal those wounds. It's beyond your control. It's beyond my control. It's almost beyond everyone's control. So that there's things that are happening last years. There's things in history that happened that we had no control over as well.
Sure.
And the port explosion is the one thing that should be very easy to hold to account. It should be very straightforward. And even then, which is kind of where I wanted to go earlier, and I'm going to bring it up now, even then I'm a bit, I'm looking for that hope. And what you said at the beginning is that, yes, you shouldn't dismiss hope outright, just like you shouldn't dismiss naivety and and delusion. But Hassan Diab stepped down yesterday, resigned yesterday. There's no fear in this man's eyes. He resigned. He's a caretaker prime minister now. In any other country, in any other situation like this one, you'd have a prime minister worried for his life and fleeing at best, or literally, I mean, admitting defeat and encouraging things to move in the right direction, not a caretaker capacity. That's not what you see happening when there's genuine anger on the street. We should own his people by now. Should have put him aside.
Told him to move,
Yeah. I mean, he alone should be, I guess he's unaware. He's unaware that there's absolute anger.
I said this on the podcast with Lena as well.
Yeah.
We have this tendency, just people in general, to assume that the people in power know as much as we do and probably know a bit more. Michel Aoun, I don't think he sits down and actually sees any of these videos of what his people are doing.
Right.
I genuinely do. Like he obviously felt the bomb. He was probably shown some footage or whatnot, but I don't think he kind of sat down and reflected upon it and ruminated over pondered over the significance of this and how must we implement reforms and how, no, none of this crosses.
Nothing.
Honestly, like anyone who still believes this is honestly not paying attention.
24 hours after the explosion, he's willing to blame other people. I mean, he's on TV saying, it's not my responsibility.
Macron gave a speech before he did.
Macron gave a speech before he did. Exactly.
Macron walked into Gemaise. Michel Aoun cannot walk into Gemaise.
I mean, even these other...
He would be dead. I'm not kidding. Honestly, he cannot walk into Gemaise.
Maybe that's the awareness there, that maybe he knows that there's certain areas that are beyond his...
At least his security people know.
Yeah, but he was comfortable enough going on TV saying, that to me shows that the rapid change you would need to see is not happening. Nabih Berri, instead of doing the right thing maybe, and sort of acknowledging that things are horrible and he's going to be the first to step down and pave the way.
He's never done that.
He sends his people to intimidate and possibly use regular ammunition. I mean, it's like rubber bullets is bad enough, but his people, his entourage, are being violent. That to me is also signs of the change that should happen is not happening. I'm going to add someone else. Saad Hariri whispers of him not wanting to be prime minister again, but at the same time considering it. I mean, at this stage, if you're still considering it, it means the problems cannot be fixed. Gibran Bassil going on CNN, willing to talk and maybe use the wrong word for the wrong occasion, ignite and these things. He's comfortable going on international television news and saying what he thinks. These people should be hiding. They should be hiding or fleeing. They're not. Mm-hmm. Now, it's been a week. It's fresh. But I don't know. I think a week is long enough to get these people out, and they're not going anywhere. They're not. Now, this goes back to the topic of maybe your own example. I'm going to share my side as well. You said that your own relatives, who until today still firmly believe that Tayyar Watan al-Hur is the answer to all of Lebanon's problems. Let's go there. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. That's going to be tricky. I know. Maybe you don't. Maybe now you have
done that for a long time.
Yeah. No, but let's say you don't. There's no communication with them right now. All right.
Sure.
And we probably, this is not special. All of us have relatives that still firmly believe in the old guard. But let's give these people the benefit of the doubt. This massive explosion hits Gemaise, Maram Khair, the port, Beirut, mushroom cloud effect. The whole world saw the worst examples of Lebanon on display. They're still unable to see that this president should step aside. If it's not going to happen through this kind of explosion, I think it will never happen. That this is I'm just going to say one more thing and then I'll let you. I think this is the curse, is that you're given endless excuses, endless justified reasons, not unjustified. This is not, these are justified reasons to let go, and you hold on. You hold on until your dying day. And you die in the process, and you'll hold on while dying. I think that's the curse. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, is that one common theme that they were telling me before the fight happened, if you want the yelling and everything, they were convinced that this was an attack. They told themselves the thing that would have fit in the narrative much better than the reality, which poses so many uncomfortable questions. Now, I'm gonna tell you something that I still haven't said in public, and I'm fine that this is public now. It's okay. I was gonna go with it at some point when I was more comfortable. It doesn't matter. When I speak of my family, and I say that my family is the kind of part of the old guard, I mean quite literally. Salim Jraisati is my uncle. He is the minister right now.
Oh.
What I'm talking about, the people who him and people around him who I know by name, who are not my family relatives, like politicians and so on around him, who are the Emil Lahoud gang, the Emil Lahoud days, those guys, who would know Jamil Sayyid by first name, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And for me, as I mentioned before, you can kind of put one and two and two together, the fact that my anti-Hezbollah stuff came via Syria, and the fact that there's the added component of the fact that these guys are close to the Assad regime, for me has cut off certain family connections that I've cut off years ago. Actually, this is not new.
Yeah.
For the most part, I don't call him because he doesn't reply anyway, and he doesn't call when he calls me. I don't reply anyway, so we don't have any actual relationship. I will try at some point, and as I said, I don't mind this being public, but I will try at some point to actually talk to him about this as well, because I will have the familial clout, even though I don't think it counts for much. The other thing is, this is the reason why when I'm criticized online by folks who are pro-Hezbollah or pro-Amal or pro-whatever, they are talking to me not knowing what my background is, not knowing that I actually went through their world before coming out of it, that I was a Hezbollah supporter at some point in my life, that I was closer to the Aouniyya than I've ever was to the Uwait. One of my childhood friend, I won't name his name, we haven't been friends in like over a decade now, but one of the reasons we stopped being friends is because he became so devoted to Samir Jarjah, to the leader of Lebanese forces. Because at that point, I was never a card-carrying member of any political party, but I was kind of more aligned with that worldview, if you want, that there is some kind of foreign conspiracy, that there's some kind of that the original March 14 movement was co-opted by foreign forces, and therefore March 8 was a necessity, etc., etc. All of that crap. All of that died for me years ago. Like, it had no salience. Like in 2011, really, it was already dead by then.
Yeah.
But the lingering connections means that I might have like a Christmas dinner having to deal with them, or like visiting my grandma and having to deal with that kind of thing.
Sure.
And being still painfully aware, if you want, of the disconnect between our worlds. So having a cousin, of course, I won't name any names. It was during the fall of Aleppo, I remember this very clearly because it was around Christmas, very easy to remember, unfortunately, of 2016, coming to me and basically asking me, do you genuinely believe that there was a revolution in 2011 in Syria? And this was 5 years later.
Yeah.
Because he genuinely believed, or probably had to convince himself, due to these family connections and so on, that there's some conspiracy behind it, that it was those studios in Qatar, and all of it was fake, and because they have to believe a certain narrative, because the alternative is to accept that the party, Hezbollah in this case, that they supported for legitimate reasons in the context of the resistance against Israel in the south, is now actually being this cynical in using their own clout. The fact that they did this, they succeeded in liberating the South. And the story is more complicated, but whatever. Let's go with that. Let's say, khalas, this is the story. The fact that they used this, and then on Liberation Day, which is supposed to be this quasi-sacred day, announced that they're in Syria. They're now, because we've known for some months before that, but they officially announced it back then. May something, whatever it was. For me, meant that they now had to create a justification for it. And this was the first time, and people, honestly, in Lebanon have not really paid attention to this. And I say this honestly, that this was the first time that Hezbollah had to justify anything. This is the first time that Hezbollah had to say, we are there because of this. He had to invent things. He had to invent takfiris out of thin air, even when they were not there. He created he created the narrative that Daesh was already in certain areas when they were not.
Yep.
It became a self-fulfilling prophecy in some way. And at the end of the day, the reason why they had to explain it, like at no point did they have to genuinely justify resisting Israel in southern Lebanon. The story was set. It was set in the war. We knew why it was there. Even in the south, obviously supported it because there was nothing else anyway. No one else was doing anything. There was no international community that was going to kick out Israel. They understood the rules of the game, if you want. There was nothing else available. No, there was no better option. So at best, they had to tolerate them because there was no better option. At war, sorry. When it comes since 2011, especially for me, everything changed. 2011 is the break, and then 2019 in the context of Lebanon, and obviously now in the past week, that's kind of the second break. So it's going to take some while to, sorry, it's going to take some while
yes,
to fully digest, if you want, the moment of what has been happening since October, and especially in the past week, I think.
Yeah.
But all of this to say that there are these narratives, some of which are inherited, some of which are developed, and they are malleable. Sometimes they're, the Auni and the FPM and the Amal movement can be at each other's throats one week, and then the next week they're besties.
Sure.
These are all flexible narratives. The gravitas of their former warlords and whatnot has sort of waned in some ways. Now, like if you notice, I do cultural studies, so I tend to have an eye and be very obsessed about these things. But if you notice, a lot of the profile pics that Aouni people use of Michel Aoun, it's usually when he was in the 80s, in his heyday.
Yes, right. Yeah.
It's very rarely like the small shivered man in his jogging. It's not as cool. It's not as nice.
I think the 2005 is usually the cutoff of the photos that I see. But that's sort of his return, and then there's that's it. 2005 is the end. Like in history books, past 1950 or so, you don't know anything. 2005 is the cutoff. But I'm going to add something here.
Sure.
I think you are thinking for yourself only. So you're coming to your conclusions without any pressure. There's no one sort of over your shoulder saying, this is your uncle. You should think like him. No one's even probably, if somebody's approaching you,
they did in the past, and I cut off their. Yeah.
Exactly, you're willing to pay the price of losing support, some support, let's say.
Sure.
Because you believe in certain things and you hold them true.
Yes.
Okay, that is something that I identify with.
Uh-huh.
And you have relatives that lean certain ways, and you tried maybe engaging them, didn't work, and you eventually sort of cut your ties. We all have relatives like this. I have relatives in the north in Tripoli and they're not particularly close. I don't see them regularly, but they are Karami worshippers. They think that Omar Karami was God's gift to planet Earth, and therefore Faisal Karami as well is somebody that's almost divine. I mean, I don't engage with them regularly, and if I do engage them, I never bring up that subject. But it's family, and that's not special either. I think even among my circle, I think even now, and I say circle not in terms of friends necessarily, but just in terms of people that I've come across in political scenes, I think they still hold the Hariri name as something it's everyone else's fault, not his.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's common. That is common.
Absolutely.
And I think you do hear some criticism, but it's never enough to actually affect change. And that's why I still wonder, up until now, why it's just so difficult for a country to dislodge its president. Emil Lahoud, who you brought up earlier, presided over a massive explosion in downtown Beirut.
Mm-hmm.
And people were protesting him. It wasn't just protesting Syria back then. They were protesting him too.
Him personally,
yeah. He was getting there were a lot of slogans against him, and they were very loud, and it was very clear that this man was unfit to be president. He wrote out his extended term.
Yes.
He stayed. That violation, those 3 years, he stayed. And the suspects to blame here are not relatives. They're not even thugs. It's the patriarch.
Yes.
The patriarch, who nominally did not support him, but put the community ahead of the country. And that's maybe taboo to say, maybe.
No.
But I think
it is in Lebanon, but not
it is. Yeah, it's taboo. But I think it shouldn't be that hard to dislodge somebody who's so unfit for the occasion.
Yeah.
And we had years and years of no president in Abda.
Yes.
So that, now we have somebody who's far more destructive, who's far more negligent, who's far more, he has baggage. He has real baggage. The video of his effigy being burned in downtown. People are doing things that were unthinkable, at least when it comes to him. They're willing to go further. The guy who was arrested for smashing his photo or taking it down and
Yes,
sort of
yes,
stepping
yes,
on
yes,
it.
yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, people are coming to his rescue. People are celebrating him. They're not defending Aoun.
Yeah,
And so there is something there, but at the same time, Aoun is still in Babda. Still in Babda. That to me is there's something that's so strong in Lebanon that the average individual, even if they're willing to abandon their comfort and see something bigger, they can't get there. I share the same thing that you just described. I'm never going to think about my grandparents or great grandparents or beyond that when it comes to what Assad did to Syria. Or for that matter, what the Palestinians were doing in the 1970s in Lebanon, Arafat. I'm never going to say, well, one is better than the other because it's more like me and that one's more like them. Or for that matter, Jaja during the war. I'm never going to see preference or exclusive demonizing because it's a religion in particular. But I think these kinds of thoughts are not mainstream. I think still Jaja is Maronite. And the Maronites determine whether or not Jaja is a criminal, not us.
Yes.
Yeah. And Hariri is incompetent. He's incompetent. You know what? He should never have been prime minister. And he inherited something, maybe something that's unpopular to certain people. He inherited something. He inherited the February 14th assassination.
Sure.
And the month later, that protest, March 14th. He inherited it and turned it into something that is maybe popular today in certain streets in Saida. Maybe.
Sure.
So he's definitely somebody that should not be prime minister again, right? And he did dancing with devils just to stay in power. And he did crooked deals with terrible people just to stay in power. He returned to the stage more times than anyone else I can think of, only to get thrown out again. And yet the man is still unable to say, I will never be prime minister again. He can't say it. He can't say it.
I mean, he went through a literal kidnapping, came back humiliated, and didn't care. He just continued.
He came back.
At some point, it is. That's the thing, is that we are assigning emotions in some ways.
But I'll just say something. It's the Sunni. It's the Sunnis, not me, not you, not them. It's the Sunni community that will judge Hariri's fate.
Sure.
And that's the curse, is that Ba'abd al-Yom, Michel Aoun is probably the most unpopular president Lebanon has ever had, and still protected. And Hariri should never be prime minister again, still protected. Berri, who's probably most unpopular among his own, is still protected. And we can't dislodge them. I cannot go to the house, I can't go to Babda without being considered a traitor. I'm not part of the equation. I'm a traitor. I can't go to the Sarai and be thought of as just an individual citizen protesting. That is what the protest movement was all about, was overcoming. I think you said trans-sectarian, this cross-sectarian mobility.
Cross-sectarian,
was that was the special thing. But even then, when you have 1 million people chanting the same slogan, the lines are drawn. And I mean, one of the worst prime ministers of all time spent 7 months, 7 months only to resign in humiliation again. So there's, I think these are lines that are not. I want them to be crossed, and I want to live in a country that's not like that. And yet that's all I'm given, is that country over and over and over and over and over. I think I've rambled too much.
No. I have two different. I won't be long on this. It's more like it's two parallel things that are happening in my mind, if you want, at the same time. One is what is likely to happen to the big two names in power. Let's say Michel Aoun and Nabi Berri. Not that there isn't a third name like Nasrallah, for example, any of the others, but the two visible ones who have the two symbolic seats in power, the president and the Speaker of Parliament. For me, we can't really even try and know what a what Hezbollah would be like, if you want, what kind of different calculations it might have to do. Because we're saying it. At the end of the day, it's like, there's a number of guys making certain decisions.
Yeah.
But like the group as a whole, what it might have to maybe even concede some things, which is impossible to even conceptualize right now, if the president was not on and if the prime minister was not Nabih Berri. No, sorry, the Speaker of Parliament.
Speaker, yeah, right.
The good news in some ways is that Michel Aoun is 85 and Nabih Berri is 82. At the end of the day, there is a ticking time clock happening.
So biology is the good news. Biology will solve it.
Honestly, like how old was I think it was the Algerian guy. He was in his 90s.
Oh, yeah. Bouteflika, I think is his name. Yeah.
So
Good guy.
It's not impossible, it's not impossible that Aoun continues and whatnot. I'm not saying it's impossible. At the end of the day, as you mentioned, it's not just him personally, it's what he represents to a certain number of people. And there's a certain amount of people in power, the patriarch maybe, some people around him, whatnot, who may even prefer a guy who's half asleep all the time in his 90s than not having anyone. It's not impossible. None of these things are impossible.
Sure.
I'm wondering, if you want more, how much can they actually do at some point? Like the thing about the explosion, the fact that it's so overwhelming, so all-encompassing.
Totality.
So like it's also like it's more like the Hiroshima-like visuals, if you want. Mm-hmm. The fact that it's both Chernobyl it might be Chernobyl in political sense, and it's closer to Chernobyl as a event anyway.
Sure. Yes.
But that it has the additional component of looking like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and also the additional component of being so filmed, because we're talking about 2020, age of social media, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
There is something that I know that the people in power, based on their own speeches so far, it goes without saying. Nabih Berri, it goes without saying. Even Nasrallah at this point, I think it just goes without saying. Do not actually understand what has been unleashed last week. What they don't fully comprehend, the severity of what happened, because I'm psychologizing here, so it may not be too relevant, but they have personally done worse. Personally, with their own hands, they have done worse to people. So I don't think we're dealing with a sentiment of like, will they ever see any humanity in them or whatnot? If they were seeing any humanity, they would have stopped warlording in the 80s and then stopped and then left the world, left politics, left whatever. They stuck around for a reason. They like where they are. They're comfortable where they are. They're getting gold, cookie points. They're getting stuff. It's a lot of gifts. They're getting praise and ego boosts, and it's comfortable being where they are. Nabih Berri does not have to deal with us. If we come 5 seconds to Ainatina, they beat the shit out of us, which is what they did. Which is what they do.
Right.
They live in their castles. They live behind their walls, behind their whatever. They can be helicoptered out. They can have their convoys of whatnot. Now not as easy because of all of the protests. But in theory, they really don't have to deal with us. They can have enough hours of their day without even asking it, have hundreds of people glorifying them and paying them tribute and saying that you're the best person in the world every single day, telling them this. Like how much criticism do you think Nasrallah gets from his advisors, including the ones that are supposed to supposedly, tell him the truth to his face or whatnot if he's doing something that might have some consequence to the party or whatnot. They don't have these. They don't exist. They are one-man parties. One-man party. Nasrallah is one-man party. Nabih Berri is a one-man party. The good news is that a man is not immortal. Is that at some point there's going to be a crack in the system, within their own system. We mentioned it last time at your own podcast as well, that if you were a dedicated Amal supporter, you should be worried right now at the fact that your dear leader is 82 years old. Like, you should be worried about this. And they don't seem to be calculating for the next day about this. They're just assuming that he's going to live until he's 120, and he's not. No offense to Damian, it's just not going to happen.
He may be the one that is not replaced. and he
Yeah.
doesn't have an heir to the throne.
He doesn't have an heir.
Right, and the fact is, and I think his own. I mean, it's not a secret. He is so unpopular among his own community that
Yes,
they'll
yes.
probably replace him with someone despicable. But that will be that secular cover for
Yes.
Hezbollah. It could be Jamil Sayed. It could be someone else. That
Exactly.
is a likely scenario, and that
Exactly.
probably just shows just how unappealing his longevity is. That there is not a future Birri in
No.
Parliament.
No.
But everything you said, I share the same sentiment. And yeah, you're right. I mean, they will die at some point. At some point, they will die. But Lebanon may die before them, if not
Yeah.
already.
It's the damage that they do in the meantime. That's the real worry.
Yeah, and I don't know. I so impressed with how the average person can still live and suffer this much in Lebanon, particularly right now. Forget resiliency. Forget that word. And I like Lina's take on it too.
I don't like that word either.
Yeah. And she
I'm done with that word.
Right, and she was able to flip it on its head, which was
Yes.
quite creative. But just the fact that there is these people that are suffering so much, and they're still able to just sort of try and fix their immediate surroundings, is something that is so taxing on a population, and they're still able to do it. My heart is with them only. I don't I don't know. It sucks to experience this wherever you are on planet Earth.
There's a difference in the same way as my friends who had left Lebanon before October 2019, that there is something that they did not experience that I did.
Right. Yes.
At the end of the day, there is now something that my friends who are in Beirut, or whatever, that they have experienced that me and you did not.
Right.
And it's just a fact. It's not like I envy them or anything like this. It's nothing like that. It's more that you would have a familiar sound, texture, experience, how your body reacted.
Yeah.
That connects you with other people who felt the same things in a faster way in some ways. But the trauma just manifests itself in a different way. The way we grieve and we mourn and we try to make it work in our minds in some ways for us to continue to be functional without being, so just on the topic of resiliency, a number of friends shared this experience and they posted it on Twitter and everything, that their parents, for example, the father of a friend, let's say, reacted so quickly in the sense that he fixed the door quickly and all of these things. And some people would interpret this as resiliency, and to some extent it is. I'm not demeaning it, but that's also something that's broken. If you're able to react so quickly, you're not supposed to be able to react so quickly. You're supposed to sit with the shit of what has just happened, and at the end of the day, you can rationalize, you can understand that a whole generation, for example, developed these tools, and good on them, of course. What's the alternative exactly? But that doesn't mean that the next generation should just pick up the same tools. That doesn't mean that we should just. I feel one advantage that I have a lot of issues with all generations and whatnot, but one thing that I feel our generation is doing a bit better, and the ones that's coming after us, the one that they call Gen Zs, are doing even a bit better than millennials, for example, is really recognizing that we're not robots. That we are very vulnerable individuals, that we have emotions, and that is fine. That there are different ways of being masculine, for example, that is not just about being macho or whatever. That, all of these things, I feel like to different extents around the world, and that's probably also an internet thing, so it travels faster, these ideas travel faster. There is a certain way of seeing that I feel does not, that there is even we are the in-betweeners, the in-between generation between the war generation and the one that might actually be the post-war generation.
You're right. Actually, yes, I really hope so too. I really hope we're the final war generation.
I just hope we're the ones who can kind of be the in-between. We translate in some ways, Of course, it may not be the case. Syria, Gen Zers in Syria are those that experience the worst part in some ways, because of when it happened, of course. In Lebanon, from what I can tell, a lot of folks who are right now, for example, 16, 17, 18, 19, that kind of age range around the time where they are in the last years of school, maybe undergrads at universities, that kind of age group, they are dealing with the reality of the system much faster than we are, because they don't even have much time left in some ways. Like, they are now growing up. Now they have to start their world, their lives, as the country is collapsing. And that gives them a different kind of tension, if you want, that they can't afford in the same way to tell themselves the narratives and to glorify a leader who, for the most part, are in their 70s and 80s now, who doesn't really have the gravitas attached to them anymore.
Right.
Because for the most part, they don't remember the Syrian occupation and they don't remember the Israeli occupation. And they don't have the same kind of lingo, if you want, a vocabulary to explain certain things. They wouldn't understand that a relative of mine who's now in her 60s, when I told her that it was during the fall of Aleppo and why I was being so pissed off at certain relatives that I mentioned before, why that was the case, she just responded, "I don't care about Syria." She literally told me that. And that's because, I mean, you can rationalize it, and her house was bombed, and etc., etc. But there was a disconnect between me and her, if you want, in that sense. Because for me, Syria, there is the government, which I've always been opposed to, even before 2011. But then there is the activists that I've met, and the friends, and all of that. That gives me a different opening to the world, if you want, that they don't have. And I feel that those that comes after us, in some ways, have even more access to these kinds of things, even faster in some ways, due to social media and whatnot, which has its own risks. Like, I don't want to paint all rosy picture. There are risks, of course. But on that specific note, I'm very interested in how the rest of us, those of us who experienced 2005, for example, or 2000, or 2006, or 2008, the really violent events of recent Lebanese history, how can we translate it much better than what our parents did with us, which for the most part was quite a failure, because they did not do a good job at translating, for the not everyone, but for the most part, a good job at translating what they actually went through, so that we understand what is this horrific shit that we just inherited, that we had to do a crash course in understanding, as I did in 2005, 2006. It was the crash course. It's like, I could have been a bit more prepared to understand who the fuck Jaja and Aoun were, because I understood those in 1 week. He came back, and
you could be excused for being 14 and have other concerns than Jaja or Aoun.
Sure.
Yeah.
But so the Jaja and Aoun thing is just a symbolic thing, because in my region they were the two dominant ones.
Right. Yeah.
And I just remember, for me, the stupid, honks, ta-da-da-ta-ta, and those,
course, yes.
And those were the ones that at some point they were all around me in 2005, around February, March, April, May 2005. And because our parents would pick us up from school, of course, and so some of them would literally do the stupid horn, and then others would respond because that was before the memorandum of understanding with Hezbollah, so they were not completely anti yet. They still have some tensions, but not the same way.
And they were just coming back to the scene. I mean, it was just in those months, right? Like Aoun first, and then Jaja comes out of jail, and so it's like
It just felt like a wave of history just slapped me in the face, and I suddenly had to understand who the fuck these people were and why they were such a big deal. Yeah. And it's only like in that same time period, but like even slower, that I started incorporating the warlords from the other sects, like Wali Jumblat and Nasrallah and Berri and those guys.
Yeah.
And it took a while. And I don't want the next generation to have to go through this. I don't want them to have to go through a decade to understand Lebanon. I don't think it is sustainable if we keep on repeating the same patterns every single time. I think that they can genuinely understand, for the most part, at least the important shit that might have taken us like a decade. They could do it in a few months now. It's generally possible now to do it in a few months, at least so that they protect themselves ideologically, if you want, or they protect themselves against the sort of narratives that they would otherwise be either vulnerable towards or vulnerable against, or that they may be so overwhelmed by that they end up just kind of, withdrawing and not really dealing with it, because that's what a lot of people do at the end of the day.
Lebanon deserves a port.
Mm-hmm.
Lebanon deserves an economy. Lebanon deserves a currency that's not free-falling into hyperinflation, and Lebanon deserves stability. Lebanon deserves a country. The Lebanese deserve a country, and Lebanese deserve justice for what happened. Compensation, not just financial compensation, but real compensation, where anyone involved in that situation is thrown away. And Lebanese and the country and all of us, generation, your parents' generation, grandparents, my parents, all of us that are still alive, we deserve some accountability for the first time. We deserve to live in a country that you can actually hold people to account and not let this kind of crime just fade away like other crimes in the past. Mm-hmm. And I hope this is what's born out of this moment. I really hope so. And that wouldn't surprise me where you see images of what looks like revenge, these gallows and burning effigies, but people need to express their rage and have it channeled into justice. And yes. I really would like to see that. If that's the consequence of this kind of moment, accountability and justice, that's the first step in the right direction. Yeah. And who knows? It's too early to tell, but
it is.
Yeah, but at least the average Lebanese today in Lebanon is aware, maybe, that doesn't matter what party you support at this time, doesn't matter. You're vulnerable just by living in a certain neighborhood or being close enough to the port. You might get killed because of all of this that happened. That is a wake-up call, I think. Yeah. And maybe some opinions will change for the better. And the reason I like talking to you is because you're principled. So your Twitter thread is kind of what I mean. Aside, so I'm going to say two things here. Your Twitter thread is one thing. It's one animal. It's one beast.
Sure.
It's full of information on every single global issue, I think, that I can imagine. And you also focus in on disenfranchised groups all the time. Mm-hmm. I've learned a lot about voices involved in the Palestinian cause, whether it's Hong Kong, whether it's it could be some LGBTQ idea that's being expressed, and you're all over the place, and I like that. I like that you're not focusing only on what's happening in Lebanon. So I enjoy the Twitter thread, but beyond the Twitter thread, it's your podcast. I think if there's any sort of global voice for justice, I mean, it's there, and yeah, I highly recommend your podcast to anyone listening or watching Fire these times. And it should be said that, and I've said this before to you in another episode, the Arab Tyrant Manual episode, which is still online, even though that podcast seems to be sort of defunct. Maybe they're not doing anything recently.
It's on pause.
But that's where I kind of grew to appreciate your principled views, because you're not leaving anyone off the hook. And recently there was a post, and you retweeted it, which I loved. The anti-imperialist ranking system, maybe? And you came number one!
I came number one.
Number
it
one.
Just became a joke. So listen, on that, just as a small parenthesis, I get a lot of those. I tend to ignore most of them. Sometimes I just feel like I'm in a funny mood and I just comment on it. But yeah, I mean, that's a mess in itself, to be honest. The Arab Tyrant Manual is so far the only one I've delved a bit deeper into it. There's unfortunately since that there's been more stuff happening. So like Hong Kong was after that, for the most part, the protests.
Yes.
Belarus now is obviously after that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that have happened since then in some ways that will just add to that same argument in some ways. But the good thing, and what I do enjoy doing, and in some ways I've gotten good at it, but it's also a coping mechanism in some ways, that when I connect with people from Hong Kong because of the geopolitical nature of the sensitive geopolitical nature of Hong Kong and how temporally fragile it is.
Right.
In the sense of like, they are really facing a beast that for the most part we can honestly barely understand. We can sort of understand it. We have some, like Iran, Hezbollah, there's some kind of thing, but the CCP, it's a different kind of machine that is very difficult to compare it. There's nothing really like it in the Middle East. That aside, I feel like there are certain connections being made. For the most part, they only start on Twitter or like online. And, probably most of them won't lead much other than like a curious encounter, maybe at some point, stuff like that. But I do hope that there will be a point where it will become instinctive. So the example I use is that during the October Revolution, there were the number of feminist groups that started chanting "Thawra Kull al-Bildan."
Yes.
For me, this is something that is a wide enough tent in some ways as a narrative that I can include folks that I wouldn't necessarily agree with on everything necessarily.
Right.
But we start having these points in common, very fundamental ones that are non-negotiable, like individual rights, freedom of speech, anti-authoritarianism, very basic stuff. Then after that, I can
That's the kind.
with
Yes,
you.
right. Yeah. No, but you said.
I can.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, you set the stage always. I think it's fairness and justice is the background to every conversation, and it comes out that it would be impossible to have common agreement on the other things that sort of make, I think, the human experience worth living. No, but like whether it's from South America to Hong Kong and Belarus, or even the Ethiopian sort of voices. I mean, you've covered a lot of ground, and a podcast that you only started a few months ago. So
in March.
In March, yeah, and I mean, it's also fun every now and then when we kind of cross paths, and there's somebody that I know that I've talked to and you've talked to as well, or you've talked to somebody and I'm curious about. I may reach out to. I like that, and I think I hold this dear that Lebanon's curse is not a Lebanese curse, that it's not a local problem. These are human beings struggling. Yeah, and
that's the thing that I've gotten a bit better at doing. It used to really bother me in the sense that one of the many problems, of course, of Lebanon is that we generally do feel isolated.
Right. Yeah.
It's a geographical thing, the fact that the only two neighbors are states that are not exactly on friendly terms, obviously. And
then there's the sea.
And then there's the sea. Yeah. But then it's a political thing. Like, the sea links us to what? To Cyprus, that's already the EU, the Schengen borders and everything. And then you have Turkey, obviously, on the northern side. And the internet is allowing certain connections to be made that, in theory, can sort of, if not transcend them fully, but like soften the blow of feeling that you're really alone, that nothing matters. I cannot tell you the response I got when we were like 4 people. We wrote this statement, just calling, very simple statement, calling on the Hong Kong government, which is basically a proxy of the Chinese Communist Party, to release the protesters who were being detained. A friend of mine translated it to traditional Chinese characters so that because Hong Kongers can read it, and it went viral. It got like 100,000 views in a day. It went really viral, and all of it was just people saying, "Thank you, this means a lot," and etc. etc. And I didn't do anything.
Right.
I just wrote 4 paragraphs saying, "We are protesters from Lebanon." Going through, I don't remember. It's on hummusforthought.com for those who want to read it. It's very simple stuff. And my point is always the fact that if we start seeing on the streets of Ethiopia to Hong Kong to Belarus to Chile to whatever, like there's going to be more. Like 2020 is the beginning. It's 2019, 2020. Like honestly, with the world, the way the world is, the fallback of COVID-19. There's going to be a lot of political, economic instabilities in the world. Like it would be ridiculous to not.
New York has been a story on its own.
I saw people from Portland, because Portland is obviously kind of at the forefront of this, also kind of send their solidarities to Lebanon. And there was this, because, Portland apparently is called Little Beirut by some people. I did not know this. I learned this recently, which is hilarious because Beirut is so little already. It's just amazing.
My one trip to Portland, I mean, I
Yeah.
know it's irrelevant to what's happening now,
Yeah.
but I think the name, I don't know where it comes from exactly. I'm not sure if it's just conflict. There's a Lebanese community there. And
There
there
is,
are,
there is,
yeah,
there
yeah, yeah. And I was surprised too. I'm like, what the hell are you doing here?
is. But yeah, like I first started it on more of a necessity, not really knowing where it would lead. By my own nature, in some ways, due to my mixed identities and whatnot, I
Yeah,
did have
yeah.
bigger or wider networks available to me when I wanted to. I was working with Global Voices as a volunteer, and then as their Middle East and North African editor,
Mm.
and that just gave me connections to someone from Uganda, someone from Russia,
Right.
just like
Yeah,
this, super
yeah,
super quick, and that allowed me to just make these connections a bit easier in some
yeah.
ways without really at some point it just became normal, it's second nature in somehow until 2019
Yeah.
when I started really feeling that there's something there, like actual political potential there that is not being explored,
Mm.
because for
Mm.
the most part it doesn't lead to anything. For the most part it is symbolic. It might make some people feel better if they go that far,
Yeah.
but for the most part political movements tend to be reaction. They're not reactionary, which is a political term, but like they react to a certain situation. They react to economic crisis, and we tend to not create something. We tend to react to something, and this is something that I'm trying to experiment with in a way until we start seeing organically on the streets of Minsk in Belarus,
Mm.
on the streets of Hong Kong, in Taipei, in Taiwan, I don't know, Addis Ababa, whatever, connections being made in which they themselves organically, without anyone saying, please do this, start have signs, we stand with the people of Hong
Mm-hmm.
Kong,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
without having to go through the permission of the global capitals first, like the Western capitals first validating these struggles, just skipping all of that. If they want to join, ahla wa sahla,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
we don't need their permission, essentially.
Yeah.
And just having more of that, is what I'm trying to get at, really.
Minsk in Belarus is a very local story. The
Yes.
Belarusian people have been suffering under their dictatorship that
Uh-huh.
that anyone else outside of Belarus would have very little understanding. It's a painful experience. They're the European country that stayed sort of locked following the
Yes.
end of the Cold War, and it's a toxic environment. You get suffocated immediately if you try to express something to the contrary, and they are going through their struggle right now, happening right now. And it's going to always remain a local story. Lebanon's
Yes.
is permanently local, no matter what attention it gets, whether it's Thomas Friedman today, and I saw you sort of reference that piece in
Yeah,
a
I'm ignoring it.
you ignore it,
I'm pretending that it doesn't exist.
but like voices like that come from sort of away from Lebanon that try to maybe bring these stories together. It's very difficult and oftentimes doesn't resonate.
Yeah.
At the same time, shared emotion and shared pain, these are not local experiences. And
No.
the internet has allowed us now to identify with the pain of a Belarusian woman risking her
Mm.
life, standing up to two monsters, really, her own
Yes.
dictator
Yes.
and Putin.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is what encourages the average person at home who's going through their own struggle to look at their monsters and say, if they can do it, we can do it too. It's not.
Exactly.
These are not.
And
These are.
these
Yeah.
connections can be made faster if we build the ground for them to be made more organically. So, like
Yeah.
once upon a time, it was a bit easier for the average Beiruti to know what's happening in Cairo or Damascus.
Mm-hmm.
Long story short, that started being divided. At some point, we all know the story. But this was a primarily Arab
Mm-hmm.
majority area thing. And there's always value to that. I'm not saying throw it out of the window completely, but I just don't think it's enough. I just don't think it's enough to only have connection with the other Arab countries, even if at the moment it's not so good, to be honest. But I don't think it's enough. I think that there
Yeah.
should be beyond ethnicities or languages or
Sure.
whatnot,
Sure.
just fundamental values that are shared that
Yeah.
can then be negotiated, changed. I'm not saying everyone has to believe the same thing.
Sure.
It's never going to happen. But just, to have a more flexible global network and more resilient global network, a community resiliency that is actually across
Sure.
borders,
Yeah.
that allows, like when Beirut happened, I had more messages from friends in Hong Kong than Honestly, no, that's not true. There are obviously more Lebanese who message me. There's just more Lebanese that I know, but disproportionately more Hong Kongers. If you want, proportionately to how many of them I know. If you want,
Right.
if you see what I mean.
But there's also
because we made these connections.
But then again, also something that happened not too long ago. It's a few months. George Floyd,
Yes.
and suddenly we at home, in Lebanon and the region, were thinking through our own prejudice, and we're saying it out loud that we are part of this problem too. And then things that are already happening in the background are even more exposed. It's the kafala system, these flights that Bangladeshi sort of woman, not Bangladesh, Ghanaian woman, celebrating on the plane. We identify with them. We're like, yes, you deserve so much better than what we did. So much better. And that's the kind of self-reflection born, I think, out of shared pain. And the Bangladeshi ship that arrived. People are, we're almost humbled by that. That it's like, look at what we did, and at the same time, they're helping us. And I think there's this, there's some strength in maybe acceptance, and a protester in wherever, in New York, let's say, or not forget New York, anywhere in the U.S. that sees a Syrian boy doing graffiti of George Floyd in a broken home, I think sees that. Yeah, it's like, oh, they're suffering too, and we should be more thoughtful about their suffering as well. And in Idlib, they're also even identifying with the pain across the world. I think that shared experience is very special. It's very special. And if it does lay the foundation for actual change, all the better. All the better. And then we'll have Joey Ayoub, the new king of the internet castle.
Whatever that means.
King of the anti-imperialists. I don't know what the
anti-imperialists.
I
don't know why they didn't just say imperialists if that's what they were getting at.
I think double negative doesn't really doesn't work in that sense. But it's a good list. It's a good list. I actually like most of those people anyway. So it's like that's my crowd. No, you're very kind, Joey. I always appreciate talking to you. This is one of the longer episodes that I'm happy. We spoke over 2 hours. We'll speak again. And all I can say is I hope for the best. There's not really much else.
I hope for the best.
Yeah.
I always also, part of me always prepares for the worst, although honestly the worst sometimes hopefully feels that the worst was last week, but we don't know for sure. I think there's a great we said this last time as well. There is a incredible potential in Lebanon, in Beirut, and Lebanon more broadly, that has been squandered for so long because of who is in power. I do genuinely believe that it is possible to create something better, and I believe that what the Beirut that I envision, in some ways, it's not just a Beirut that's even for the Lebanese. It's a Beirut that's for everyone who lives there. Yes. It's for all the Syrians, the Ethiopians, the Sri Lankans who really genuinely feel they're part of the community there because they've been there for so long. Many of them speak Lebanese Arabic, whatever. Yeah. It gets to a point where, in the same way as in theory one can become a New Yorker, one can become a Londoner, right. I genuinely believe that one can become a Beirut. I've always genuinely believed this, but I never really had the vocabulary to express it in a more rational way. Now it's very visual because when people tell me, what do you mean? I tell them I mean the Syrians and the Ethiopians and the Ghanaians and the Kenyans who went to the streets on their own volition to help clean up the damage that they did not do. And they did not have to clean. They had no obligation to do anything that they did, but they did it anyway. And I think we should pause and reflect on these things as well.
These are heroes. These are heroes. There's a video, I think, of a baby or a toddler on the balcony, and then like a woman goes and grabs her And I mean, these are genuine heroes. And I think that's the true definition of a cosmopolitan city, is when everyone is embraced, everyone across the board. Joey.
It becomes a residency-based identity, which I'm hoping to get at some point.
Well, that's
One day.
In the meantime, keep doing what you do, and we'll speak soon. Thanks for listening, and a friendly reminder to help support this podcast by contributing through Patreon or PayPal. All links are in the details box below. Until next time, I'm Ronnie Shatah, and this is the Beirut Banyan.